Today's show is sponsored by Yafa Bey and her Spirit of Tepereth Marketplace. For you and your naturally special gifts, we of the Spirit of Tepereth, through our metaphysical market located at 1273 West Broad Street in Columbus, desire to provide you guidance and support through this, your life's journey. We provide tools such as candles, incense, charms, jewelry, wall hangings, oils, crystals, and much more. We look forward to spiritual growth with you at the Spirit of Tepereth. You can find all our sponsors' information in the show notes on our website. Now let's start the show.
The controversial group leader in charge, ADOS, or the American Descendants of Slavery. The controversial group ADOS. ADOS, or the American Descendants of the controversial group ADOS. ADOS, the American Descendants of the controversial group ADOS.
Welcome to the Articles of ADOS podcast, a weekly show where we bring you undiscussed news, articles, and information important to the American descendants of slavery, our friends, and our allies. This is episode 5. I'm your host, Lisa Todd, along with my co-host,
Daud Giazon. On today's show, we will share some articles from Richmond Free Press, SarahCarter.com, Ben Swan's YouTube channel.
Later in the show, stay tuned for our main event where we dive into and interview a brief from the National Institute of Justice entitled DisOrder in Urban Neighborhoods. Does it lead to crime?
Are you busy? Is the news coming so fast you can barely keep up? No worries. The Articles of ADOS podcast is here to help. Hit the subscribe button wherever you're listening right now, and we'll make sure you stay up to date on the news and information that affects you and your ADOS life.
Personality
Piece. This week in our personality piece, the question is, should more boomers get involved with ADOS, or are they tired? And at what age can you get tired when there's still more work to be done?
Very good. That's good.
What do you think? Should more boomers get involved in ADOS?
Of course, without a doubt.
Given the history of Black politics in America, do you think boomers have historically dropped the ball in this area?
Oh man, big time.
And I personally think we should have more ADOS boomers. We all know that they more than not have a little bit more resources than the average ADOS. So I think they can give in more ways that they realize. How do you feel about boomers in the ADOS movement?
For the reasons you just gave, I believe that it would be good to have them, more of them included. I, like myself, am one among that number, and I think it's a very good and worthwhile experience and attempt to change the social and economic dynamics of ADOS people as we live our ADOS life. So I think it's a positive thing.
You know, I do have empathy because I am not a boomer and I do get tired. I do have days where I'm just not in the mood to fight or get involved. I just want to sit down and have some peace. But can we afford that type of mentality in a whole generation? Mm-hmm. Yes, have days where, you don't feel like, getting involved, but the next day pick up where you left off. I think that boomers don't do that, and those that do are rare. Mm-hmm. We all get tired. I know some of you say, well, I fought in the 60s, or I fought with King, or I fought, side by side with Panthers, if you were one of the Panthers. But the fight doesn't stop because those days are gone. Mm-hmm. You can see out your window, you can see in your community that things still are in bad shape and we still need your help. And there are a lot of ways that you can help. Mm-hmm. So how do you feel about the aspect of people saying, well, boomers are just tired, they no longer want to fight?
I understand that is an easy excuse or understanding of the situation among boomers. Well, we must also remember, as we're all humans, that as we age, we do tend to slow down. I'm at the tail end of the boomer generation. We have to also realize that a lot of the baby boomers are the median of them are going to be over the age of 70. So it shouldn't be a surprise that they may not kick as high as they once do, as my father often remarks himself. He's at the beginning of the boomer period. So that shouldn't be a surprise. The complexity comes in as to other factors that are motivating behavior. Some of them are not going to be participating, not just because they're up in age, but also because they idealistically don't necessarily identify with the difficulties that millennials, Gen Xers, and tail end baby boomers like myself are experiencing in this society. So their lack of activity may be because they're tired, but it also may be because they just don't see the realities that a lot of younger ADOS face. Yeah, it's beyond their experience. They're almost some of them are like Joe Biden's answer as to, the difficulties that millennials are saying that they face. And he said he had no sympathy for them. All they have to do basically in that response is just work harder. Well, some black baby boomers feel the same way because they have their own life experience during a time where working hard gave them more economic and social uplift. This time we have the reality that many millennial young people have gotten higher education and are not seeing the same gains that baby boomers did in their 20s and 30s with a high school education. So there's a disconnect there that I think a lot of black baby boomers don't perceive. Not all, but many of them.
In regards with them participating with the ADOS movement, okay, I understand if you're not as enthusiastic as a younger ADOS may be, but there are ways that you can participate in your own way. Mm-hmm. Meaning, no, you may not go out and campaign and walk the neighborhoods for maybe an ADOS candidate, but could you make a phone call for them? Mm-hmm. Ask for somebody's vote, on the next election? Could you maybe donate $50 to that campaign if you had it? Could you find other ways to get involved that are not necessarily grand, but are essential?
Well, this is you talk about us being our personalities. Mm-hmm. I, did the 9 to 5 and I jumped out of that circle, that comfort circle, when John Crawford III was murdered at the Walmart in Beaver Creek, not too far from where my own daughters were living at the time. And I was just moved. I refused to just go to my job and, write in petitions. Some young people, I can't believe I say that. Some young people came down from Ohio State University to participate with local activists to stage a sit-in at the police department there. And I showed up, at first going to do the easy thing, but it's the thing that baby boomers can do. As Yvette often tells us, baby boomers were able to acquire some level of comfort / wealth that allows them to comprise over 75% of our collective wealth as a group. So I showed up saying to them, I showed up just giving them money.
Okay.
Because that's what I could do to help them. And they were very thankful because they were low on money and didn't know how they were going to feed those people they were going to sit in overnight. And after I gave the money, I said, well, I can do more. So I did it. I sat in overnight with them on that hard floor and it impacted me. And so I can understand why some are tired. But I was willing to do that because I knew I, as an individual, had not done as much as I could have that may have prevented or put us in a better footing of holding those police officers accountable for what they did to that young man. So that's what I did. And that is an example of what other baby boomers can do, especially when it regards the money. These young people are out here struggling. I was overnight when we sat down on that floor. I was enamored with their level of activism and the fact that some of them were even staying within the school context. They decided to take on another major or something else to legitimize them being there because they wanted to be on campus for this fight. And I was just blown away by that. And so who couldn't be enthused by young people doing what we should have been continuing to do into the 70s and 80s, but we did not. And some of the reasons why I said I needed to sit down with them is because I did not do that work, and I wanted to sort of make up for it.
I got you. Okay. And I believe Yvette had brought up this perspective that even if you don't want to get involved in the ADOS movement or any other local things that you can do to fight for the Black community in your area, at minimum, can you not block or hinder those that are? If young people are telling you Biden is not the answer, or if they're telling you other candidates have better policies, not only for you, but for us, the young folk, then listen. Can you support others in different ways and not, continue to vote for candidates that, one, do nothing for you or the community? Two, can you keep an open mind on something can be different than what it used to be? Things change and things will not stay the same. And you working hard to keep them the same is hindering our progress.
Mm-hmm. At the same time, yes, we do have that ideological difference or distance between the baby boomer experience and perception of our reality versus young. And we do need to realize that not all baby boomers are like that. And so your appeal earlier is to those baby boomers who do think something's fishy is going on, that they do recognize that Biden has a troubled racial past. And at least if you have that awareness, then please don't sort of contradict yourself by being willing to stand up for and or have negative opinions of and express those negative opinions and then hope to hinder ADOS progress.
All right. And that's this week's personality piece. We certainly encourage ADOS of any age. Please get involved. We need more activists. We need more supporters that have the same lineage and the same political views that you want to see implemented.
Catch the fire. If you're ADOS, an ally, or friend, we encourage you to connect with a local ADOS chapter and help change your local politics. Our ADOS Ohio chapter in Columbus meets every fourth Sunday of the month. For more information on the time and location, visit adoscolumbus.org.
If you also need more information on the ADOS movement, our politics, and the agenda, please visit ADOS101.com.
Today in Rapid News Reports, we have some articles that you may have missed, all in some way affect you and your ADOS life. Up first, we have
title: U.S. colleges continue to grapple with ties to slavery. The promise of reparations to atone for historical ties to slavery has opened new territory in a reckoning at U.S. colleges, which until now have responded with monuments, building name changes, and public apologies. Georgetown University and 2 theological seminaries have announced funding commitments to benefit descendants of the enslaved people who were sold or toiled to benefit the institutions. While no other schools have gone so far, the advantages that institutions benefited from the slavery economy received new attention as the formerly crowded field of Democratic presidential candidates talked about tax credits and other subsidies that nudged the idea of reparations toward the mainstream. This is from Richmond Free Press, author Carolyn Thompson for the Associated Press. I scored this article good. And next we have
from the publication Wall Street Journal Opinion: Tech Workers and Asians Against Racial Preferences. Tagline: Washington state unions try to reverse a 1998 ballot measure and bring back affirmative action. The deep blue state of Washington decided 21 years ago to end race-based affirmative action in college admissions and public hiring. 58% of voters approved Initiative 200 in 1998 to prevent the government from discriminating or granting preferential treatment based on race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin in public employment, education, and contracting. But in April 2019, Democrats in Olympia brought racial preferences back to the evergreen state by passing a measure called Initiative 1000. Writer John Carlson: I grade this fair. The article is good, identifying a good thing that's happening and taking place, but it omitted how white women are disproportionately the beneficiaries of affirmative action, even through those periods where it was seriously being attacked. They remained silent. And the article did a poor job of identifying that. Up next,
binary political dangers for Black America. As America muddles its way through these perilous times, too many in the African American community appear to be more confused than ever. We have traded our interest in for electability and anybody but Trump. Former NAACP board chair Julian Bond told us that we have no permanent friends and no permanent enemies, just permanent interests. Malcolm X called them permanent agendas. By failing to develop, understand, and articulate our permanent interests or agendas, we fell victim to the problem of binary politics, the simplistic either-or scenario. Yes, this is a two-party system, but failing to have an Afro-diasporic worldview continuously leaves us with the simplistic and deadly choices of the status quo. Do you want lead in your drinking water or mercury? Do you want arsenic with your grits, baby? Or do you want mama to sprinkle a bit of strychnine on them for you? Having an Afro-diasporic worldview does not mean that we are a monolith. It recognizes that we share a common history, oppressor, and we should have common issues and values. This is from the publication Florida Courier. Writer Dr. Wilmer Leon, a producer and host of the nationally broadcast call-in talk radio program Inside the Issues with Wilmer Leon. I graded this article a good. Finally, somebody in the national media calling out the status quo. Up next we have
newscast. Investigator Ben Swan's YouTube channel titled Truth: Seasonal Flu Twice as Deadly as Coronavirus. Tagline: the coronavirus numbers are being skewed, resulting in driving panic. The panic is driving lockdowns, and the lockdowns are driving us into a situation that will negatively affect tens of millions of Americans. According to the WHO, the mortality rate for the coronavirus is at 3.4%, and that number is making headlines. But what the media is not going to tell you is that that number is also pretty crude and poorly calculated. Their number does not include mild cases that do not require medical attention. They just left them out completely. Again, according to the WHO, the coronavirus mortality rate is 3.4%. They said, however, that the seasonal flu was 0.1%. And when that report came out, all of a sudden, every single news outlet ran that everywhere. The problem is that the same formula used to calculate the projected coronavirus mortality is being used to determine the seasonal flu's mortality rate. When comparing, according to the WHO's own full formula as applied to both the coronavirus and seasonal flu, the seasonal flu is twice as deadly as the coronavirus. The problem is that the media is too lazy that when the WHO came out with their initial reports on the coronavirus, reporters just ran with that headline without taking a clear look at how they arrived at those numbers. So according to the WHO's own numbers that can be found on their website, from 2019 to the present, 69 deaths have occurred in the U.S. due to the coronavirus. 22,000 deaths, however, have occurred due to the seasonal flu. Investigative reporter Ben Swan. I grade this good. A good video news report. Up next, from the publication Sarah.com, titled Senators Must Be Investigated. Dumping stocks after COVID-19 classified briefing is insider trading. Senate Intelligence Committee Chairman Richard Burr, along with 3 other Senate colleagues, should be ashamed and investigated for insider trading if reports alleging they dumped their stocks after receiving a classified briefing on coronavirus January 24th are true. If it is true, which it appears to be, Burr should also be removed as the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. According to reports, he sold 1.6 million of his stock after receiving the closed-door briefing. He, along with Republican Senator Kelly Loeffler, Democratic California Senator Dianne Feinstein, and Oklahoma Republican James Inhofe, were privy to information that the rest of the nation was unaware of regarding the crisis brewing with COVID-19, and basically that's called insider information. Writer Sarah Carter, I grade this a good article. As the stock market was crumbling due to the weight of the ongoing corruption, the politically connected white elites sold you out for their god, profit, while they have you huddled in your home. It doesn't matter Democrat or Republican. Whiteness and white lies keeps them in positions where they repeatedly do this, while you are struggling. Pox on both your houses. Investigation of the reasons for the stock market crash is also in order. And that's it for today's Rapid News Reports. All articles will be shared in our Facebook group and in our show notes on our website.
Time now for the main event.
In researching for articles to add to the Rapid News Reports, I came across an article about how neighborhood disorder affects pregnant African American women. Excuse me, say what? What is neighborhood disorder? And who gave the hood a clinical diagnosis? So I Googled it, and according to SpringerLink, the definition of neighborhood disorder refers to observed or perceived physical and social features of neighborhoods that may signal the breakdown of order and social control, and that can undermine the quality of life. Oh, so it's a neighborhood that is in disorder. My Google search also uncovered a brief published in 2001 by the U.S. Department of Justice in conjunction with the National Institute of Justice, entitled Disorder in Urban Neighborhoods. Does it lead to crime? I don't know. Does it? Well, they studied it, so let's just find out. Writer Julie E. Samuels will be interviewed, Daud will ask the questions, and I'll provide the answers. So let's dive into it, shall we?
When was your study published and why was it needed?
It was published February 2001, and we were a part of the long-range project on human development in Chicago neighborhoods, assessing the broken windows thesis and its implications for crime control policy and practice.
What's the reason behind the thesis?
The reasoning is that even such minor public incivilities as drinking in the street, spray painting graffiti, and breaking windows can escalate into predatory crime because prospective offenders assume from these manifestations of disorder that the area residents are indifferent to what happens in their neighborhood.
What does disorder trigger?
Disorder triggers predictions in the minds of insiders and outsiders alike, changing the calculus of prospective homebuyers, real estate agents, insurance agents, and investors. The extent of disorder reflects the extent of residents' effectiveness in improving their neighborhoods and may affect their willingness to sustain their activism.
Is disorder related to crime?
Disorder is indeed related to crime. The broken windows metaphor is apt, insofar as it asserts that physical signs of decay signal neighbors' unwillingness to confront strangers, intervene when a crime is being committed, or ask the police to respond. Disorder may in fact be more useful than crime.
In what way was disorder being viewed?
Typical activities categorized as social disorders such as soliciting prostitutes and loitering, and incivilities like painting, graffiti, or evidence of either crime or ordinance violations. The forces producing these minor crimes may be the same as those that produce more serious crimes, with the difference only in the degree of the seriousness. Viewed this way, disorder and crime are manifestations of the same phenomenon. What we really need to know is what lies behind crime and disorder.
What are some differences in neighborhoods with or without disorder?
Where there is cohesion and mutual trust among neighbors, the likelihood is greater that they will share a willingness to intervene for the common good. We have coined the term for this as collective efficacy, a key social process proposed in this research as an inhibitor of both crime and disorder.
So how did they measure this disorder?
Through a method of observation. What is visible in public places. The method is systematic in the sense that observation and recording are done in a way that permits replication. What is observed are natural social phenomena, or events and their consequences viewed as they occurred.
Can you go into more detail on the observation?
To measure disorder, trained observers videotaped what was happening on the streets in 196 neighborhoods that varied by race, ethnicity, and social class. As the observers drove and filmed, they produced a permanent visual record that would be accessible at any time.
What information did they log?
Signs of physical disorder were such items as garbage on the streets, litter, graffiti, abandoned cars, and needles and syringes. Counted as signs of social disorder were such activities as loitering, public consumption of alcohol, public intoxication, presumed drug sales, and the presence of groups of young people manifesting signs of gang membership.
Were there other ways you interacted with the residents?
To find out the extent of neighborhood collective efficacy, some 3,800 residents of these neighborhoods were interviewed. People were asked, for example, about the likelihood that neighbors would take action if they saw children misbehaving in public and whether the neighbors were willing to help each other. Neighborhood residents were asked whether they or a member of their household had recently been victimized either by a violent crime or by a burglary or theft.
What causes disorder?
Poverty was the single most important factor found to influence the level of disorder in the Chicago neighborhoods studied. Disorder tends to be high not only where levels of poverty are high, but also where immigration populations are concentrated.
When Broken Windows was revisited, what did it reveal?
Overall, the findings did not support the thesis that disorder directly causes crime. The implication is that the disorder and crime have similar roots. The forces that generate disorder also generate crime.
That's not the cause.
No, it's the structural characteristics of neighborhoods, as well as neighborhood cohesion and informal social control, not levels of disorder, that most affect crime. Where collective efficacy was strong, rates of violence were low regardless of social demographic composition and observed disorder.
What crime was most linked to disorder?
A direct association with disorder was found only for robbery.
So does tough on crime and disorder policies work?
More important, the findings strongly suggest that policies intended to reduce crime by eradicating disorder solely through the law enforcement tactics are misdirected.
What is the most effective way to approach disorder?
Tackling public disorder as a means of reducing crime leaves the common origins of both. Perhaps more effective would be an approach that focuses on residents' efforts to stem disorder, may reap unanticipated benefits in greater collective efficacy, which in turn would lower crime in the long run. Informally, mobilizing a neighborhood cleanup, for example, would reduce physical disorder while building collective efficacy by creating and strengthening social ties and increasing awareness of the residents' commitment to their neighborhood. Such a mobilization might also demonstrate to participants and observers alike that neighborhood residents could be relied on to maintain public order. By contrast, a police-led crackdown on disorder would probably produce a very different response by residents. Well, that completes this interview. Thank you for your time and information. Listeners, you can read this full article on our website in this week's show notes.
Coming up, we have the commentary on this article. Do we agree with it? What grade do we give it? Do we like it? Do we hate it? Stay tuned.
Liking the show so far? One of the best ways to support this show is to leave us a rating on iTunes. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you, and we thank you for your support, and we thank you for clicking that subscribe button. You're family now, so come on in and make yourself at home. Before we give our commentary, I would like to insert a clip here. It's a video from the Northeastern University where Professor Dan O'Brien explains his thoughts on the broken window theory, as well as how it relates to neighborhood disorder. Does neighborhood disorder create crime? Keep in mind, this video was just released within the last year, so we have come to learn if it does or does not. We've also come to learn that there are other ways to approach broken window theory and neighborhood disorder.
Hi, thanks for joining us. We're live in the News and Northeastern newsroom with Dan O'Brien. He teaches public policy, urban affairs, criminology, and criminal justice all here at Northeastern. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Making
Thanks
the
for having
time.
me.
We're here today to talk a little bit about the broken windows theory. So for people who are watching who might not be familiar, can you give us kind of the rundown on what that theory is and how it came to be?
Absolutely. So broken windows theory was, it came out in this somewhat famous essay in The Atlantic in 1982. And the simple idea was that disorder in neighborhoods, so disorder is defined as essentially any evidence that people aren't taking care of space or are intentionally damaging space. So graffiti, abandoned buildings, broken windows, quote unquote, right, would then lead to crime. The logic was rather simple and intuitive, where basically the argument was where one sees broken windows, hey, I could break another window, and breaking windows is fun. And they sort of extrapolated this to be about crime in general. And so since then, the theory has really taken on a life of its own. It's expanded beyond criminology to public health, and a number of other fields, developmental psychology, just ways that people have now argued disorder can impact our behavior, and our operation in neighborhoods. And this had a lot of influence on both science and policy.
It sounds like a lot of the theory is based in almost like a mentality of what can be, what's accepted or what can be gotten away with in a community. Would you say that's
exactly right.
Okay.
Right. And so the original theory was articulated as kind of this idea of the disorder itself is a signal. It's telling you what you can get away with around here.
Okay.
And that can cut both ways, right? It can tell someone who wants to get away with something, hey, you can do that, and no one's going to stop you. And it can tell someone who's not interested in that, hey, this place might be dangerous, right? There might be things other people could get away with here that aren't in your best interests. So the argument of the theory was that not only does it encourage crime among those who would commit crime, it discourages natural socializing, being friendly, talking on the street among all those other people who are kind of the foundation of the community.
There are two main questions that you say you unpack in this research. What are they?
So we unpacked two kind of, well, the original broken windows theory, this idea in criminology that disorder will lead to crime, and then an offshoot of broken windows theory in public health, which is that disorder not only leads to crime, but will lead to negative health outcomes for local residents.
Yeah. And so those are the three kind of moving pieces: disorder, the crime aspect, and then how that crime might impact public health.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I'm on the right path.
Well, it's actually disorder impacting crime and disorder impacting public health separately.
Okay.
So, and crime as well could potentially impact public health. But the theory that we were testing was that disorder hits both of those things.
Okay. So diving deeper into that, according to what you found, how do those three impact each other, or did you find that they don't in some cases?
Yeah, that's a great question. And largely the answer is we found that they don't.
It's a big question.
So let's unpack the two sets of relationships because they came out differently. Mm-hmm. So we tested the disorder crime question, and we're really interested in, so the way broken windows theory is normally talked about, it's talked about the neighborhood level. It's and that's the way policymakers who embrace broken windows policing talk about it. Because broken windows policing basically says, get rid of low-level misdemeanors, get rid of disorder, and people won't commit crime right around here. And they talk about it as a neighborhood thing, right? Neighborhood has disorder, later time, neighborhood has crime. But in order for that to happen, disorder has to change the behavior of people, right? So what we dove into was the question of, does disorder actually have that effect on residents? Does it change the way they behave? And so on the crime end, we tested two things. We tested, do individuals living in neighborhoods with more disorder, are they more likely to commit crime? Are they more likely to demonstrate aggression, right? In general, and that could be criminal, or it could be like a study with young children showing aggression in classes. So we took all the studies that tested that, and then we also took all the studies that had ever tested whether disorder impacted fear of crime, negatively impacted one's attachment to their neighborhood, because that's that other side of sort of socially retreating away from disorder. And essentially what we found was both those hypotheses did not hold when you look at the whole body of the literature and when you control for certain decisions researchers might have made and that would strengthen the relationship between disorder and these things. For health, we found a somewhat different story. So we didn't, essentially the headline for health is we didn't throw out the purpose of, or the role of disorder entirely.
Okay.
So there are three kind of proposed pathways for why disorder could lead to public health outcomes. One is disorder is unpleasant. It might be threatening in some way. So then people don't exercise.
Okay.
Right? Another one is disorder encourages, just like it encourages crime, it encourages other types of risky behavior. So it encourages people to drink, to smoke, to do drugs, and to take part in risky sexual behavior. And then the third one is disorder is threatening and stressful to experience in some way, and that can lead to poorer mental health and outcomes of that nature. And what we basically found was of those three pathways, only the third one held. So there was no evidence for the lower exercise. The evidence was unclear. It was not supportive of the risky behavior one. And what we really found was evidence, though, that disorder does lead to residents having lower mental health outcomes.
Between the video and the brief, what do we think of all this information? Because it was a lot.
And I agree with it. I'm glad we went through it because it went into detail how irrelevant or really nondescript the approach of the broken windows policy was and is. I submit even further that probably the crafters even knew that. I think some people sit in the back room somewhere and say, well, how can we justify what we want to do to poor people, particularly Black people, America's historically despised groups, purposely? Why do I say that? I mean, this is just so easy. You had the Black codes. Today we have the perspective of saying prior to the 1900s, prior to the 20th century, that whites wanted to control and better determine what happened to the bodies of Black folk. So what were the problems that they were experiencing, Black folk? One was their presence. They passed vagrancy laws. It was all justifiable. If they're hanging out in a group of a gang, that must be a problem. Take it up to the 1980s, that's your broken windows policy right there. Now, we have the crime bill, and at the time, there was a lot of crazy, erratic behavior around Black crime. And people can say, yes, it was increasing. It was CIA-induced crack epidemic that was happening, and it was devastating families, causing disorder that I didn't see mentioned here about the outside things that impact and establish disorder, but it's just the broken windows or the fact that you have mothers using while they're pregnant, or that you have people competing for drug territory. That's the problem, not the CIA bringing the drugs in. It's like it's the same thing as, well, white people or people who are powerful and elite have lots of money. Is there a potential of crime there? Yes, we know that. We also know that people, whether it be religious power or political power, tends to attract sociopaths. But I don't see much legislation trying to regulate their lives, or regulation of standards that make sure they don't rip off the economy. Oh, it just keeps happening. Oh, well, I don't want to go on that tangent. But that being said, it's the same dynamic. The poor are subjected to the whims and interests and ideologies of the powerful, and it can be justified. You can draw a correlation any way you want, but no one is challenging them on causation. And that is something they do want to stay away from, that people that are subjected to that need to really get a handle on and say, no, what you're doing is just trying to control Black bodies so you continue to exploit them and or contain them to produce other forms of profit for them. That's the prison industrial complex.
Advocates of the broken windows policy, I've noticed in this research for this main event, is that they noticed some improvement in crime when, let's say, for example, they cleaned up an abandoned home, boarded up the windows. It signals, they feel it signals to vagrants and criminals that we care about this place. You can't just do whatever you want here. In fact, if you do, we'll call the police. We're watching you. We're looking out for our neighbors. So in a sense, yes, it can help, but what is it changing? What is the underlying, what is the causes of the disorder? Why is that house vacant with the homeless population so high? What is the graffiti. What are the young people crying out about? What are they upset about? Do they have jobs available for them to do something other than graffiti? No one's looking at what's causing the disorder. They just want to react to the disorder. And that's the approach that Rudy Giuliani took in New York, and states across the United States followed suit. Mm-hmm. So it has to be dealt with in both, as the brief suggested. It has to be dealt with both at the same time. One, it's not that I don't feel like nobody cares, is that some people have been scared to death to get involved in the things that are happening in their communities. And it takes a level of fearlessness to approach any type of disorder that's going on if you don't have the support. And for many years, you call and try to get support, and no one would come, no one would show. There's no distrust in the people that you're calling for help. Our neighborhoods are seen as not caring, where there's just no trust in the help that we can call anybody. You see what happened to a lot of times where parents are calling for help with their mentally disabled kids, mm-hmm. and they end up dead. Yeah. So it's not all about that, the people in the neighborhoods don't care. Is that they've learned that nobody else cares, so why should they care? That, of course, is where leaders in these neighborhoods have to step in and put hope back into the neighborhood, and give them something to want to protect. But a lot of people just be like, I can't be the only one, so it's we'll see how, we'll see what type of new policing is eventually going to be transitioned to, due to public outcry, due to Black Lives Matter. Things are slowly changing into a direction that we're not quite sure where it's headed. I just thought in this research, as that this was important to be brought up again, because I've never heard of it. Mm-hmm. I've heard of broken windows, but I never heard of neighborhood disorder. And I've never heard of them just observing us, taking notes, logging, seeing how we react to this, seeing how we don't react to that. It's a part of, to me, policing, in the sense that they're monitoring what we're doing to study us. They study us, they study us, they study us, and there's no change, only incremental, if any.
Well, there's a long history of this. W.E.B. Du Bois was famous for his analysis of, I believe it was a Philadelphia neighborhood. I may be wrong on that. Please, I hope you're listening and will write in and correct me. He was made famous for his analysis of what was happening to Black people in particular in that analysis, and it became very famous. So there's been a long line of study, and in future broadcasts that we'll do, I'll be talking about some of them rather famous and infamous even. But for a larger view, this is so repetitive. We get caught up in cycles of when these things happen, especially within our lifetime, and that's understandable. But a more wider view, and I think a very accurate one, would elicit the reality of what happened as the rise of industrialization was taking shape, where the British colonies were rethinking their stance on slaves and slaveholding. It wasn't because they were being altruistic. It was because the advent of technology was driving how things could be done. Things could be done more efficiently with the advent of emerging technologies at the time. So they grew to be less reliant on them. And so therefore they outlawed it and then, held up certain characters to be celebrating them. But what did they do internally to make that engine of the rising industrialization of their society work? They pushed a lot of people off of the countryside and into city areas where they could work for people or big businesses. And in doing so, they developed concepts today we still use to this day of crime and attitudes toward crime. If they would just stop having babies, there'd be less crime. If they would just start doing this, they had drug dens. Watch the movie Hell with Johnny Depp. When you look at that and compare the use of the drug den there, you have the Art for Dodger in the Disney reproduced classics of today from Charles Dickens, who documented through story what was happening there to poor people. Well, you have drug dens, you have street criminals, you have street gangs, you have 1985 Compton. Same thing, same dynamic. But here it's taking place within the context of post-industrialized America. So you have characteristic same behaviors. This is both nothing new and isn't surprise for people who do this study work, but they just don't get a voice. They're not invited on the talk shows to make these explanations plain, that this is a continued manifestation of the exploitation of the poor versus those who have power within the concept of capitalism and how it works. And we just keep going along as though it's something new or something new to discover when it's really not. It's the same old song and dance. When I started work in the 1980s, the big thing, and what people wonder where in the early 90s, that Mrs. Clinton got the concept of super predator. She didn't make it up. It was made up earlier in the 1980s with a group that was going around, a conservative group, by the way, from I believe it was the Heritage Foundation, who was coining this new term, and then they had to make up correlations to justify it. The idea of the criminal mind. It's not black people we're really after. We're just after this criminal mind. And it's connected to genetics, and it's this criminal gene that's getting some people to do it. Those people disproportionately looked at, those people disproportionately examined under this microscope were black children they were experimenting on that we don't talk about to this day. So that was where they would say, if something's not done about this criminal mind with this criminal gene promoting violence that promotes violence and violent behaviors among our young people, we're going to look at the super predator by 10 to 15 years. And they were saying that. I was going into that, and I didn't agree with it at the time. It was a job. I was happy to have a job at that time. But that was the reality I was walking into, that people had this mentality, and they say, see, here's the studies. So I did my research and I would debunk it. People just stopped talking to me about it. But I still had to keep my job. So here at the celebration of the signing of Clinton's crime bill in 1992, there you go. Mrs. Clinton, all she did was repeat what was they said what we created. And she was using that as a justification for the crime bill. We've got to do something about these super predators. We've got to do something that puts them under heel, like a dog. I mean, come on. So again, this is just a reproduction of the same old. You have the Clintons doing what they did, which I just explained, and then you have, and read a Charles Dickens novel. You have the upper class there making the same complaints, the exact same complaints. Now, remedies. We do know the remedies. You go to the late 1900s in America with the Italians and Irish and Greeks who had young people running the streets in gangs, being disruptive in the society. People wondered what they were going to do. They considered it the end and biblical end of the society because we had to control our young people. They're out of control. The YWCA programs, the YMCA programs, work programs, training them to be from young adults and transition into adulthood. Those things began to proliferate to answer to that call and demand among young people who may have been bored, but also were without skills and ways of being accepted in society, because Italians and Irish and others weren't considered white in the society. So they were treated like and despised in the society. So their children rebelled against that. So in response to that, yes, they did a few things that were definitely inhumane, but ultimately they ended up doing things of compassion, providing skills and also areas for them to have fun in and grow from, so they could become developed and integrated people. It's just that we're continue to be in this state because they don't want to integrate us, and they definitely don't want to pay a debt that's owed.
That's it for this week's main event. All links and articles will be listed in our show notes and in our Facebook group.
#ADOS. This is where we grab our favorite tweets from the week under the hashtag ADOS and share them with our listeners. If you make this segment, you have said something. That means we liked it and want to share it. Our first tweet is from
@StayWokeCinema. 40 acres or a savings bank. The free slave had to make the transition from capital to becoming capitalist, from being chattel to owning it. They had to do this having neither money, property, nor friends, as Frederick Douglass explained. #The color of money. #lineage matters. #ADOS.
From Maxwell Little. at MaxHPF. I ain't heard one white or Latina person say to me, where will they get the money for COVID-19? $1,200 worth of stimulus checks to every American, but many of them made it their duty to ask that question when we scream hashtag reparations for hashtag ADOS. I don't like that. No friends.
In reference to a news article entitled Hollywood Slams Coronavirus-Related Racism Toward Asian Americans. Call it out. DAP/ADOS Tribe Twitter handle @black_action. Is this the same Hollywood that casts black people as pimps, prostitutes, gang members, drug dealers, drug addicts, etc.? Hashtag ADOS.
Vandal, aka Reggie Trimbach, Twitter handle @IamVandal617, shared a clip from Yvette Carnell's show imploring the need for ADOS to vote down ballot if no black agenda or reparations given specific to us by the Democratic Party, and his response was, now more than ever, we need to stand firmly on our square. The COVID-19 coronavirus should have no sway over the resolve of ADOS to vote down ballot in November. Rome can still burn. Reparations 2020 and 2024 and 2028 and 2032 and 2036 and 2040 and so on.
Thank you, ADOS, for your voices and your tweets. We will continue to feature the ones that stand out to us. You can tag us on Twitter at Articles of ADOS if you want us to feature your tweet in our show. Everyone that's featured also is given full credit in our show notes on our website. There you have it, family. Another week, another show. Thanks for joining us on the Articles of ADOS podcast. Make sure to visit our website, articlesofados.com, where you can join our mailing list, see the show notes for today's episode, and to leave us a voice message to be featured on the show.
Now that you're family, we'd love it if you'd like our Facebook page and join our private Articles of ADOS group. This is where you can connect with other listeners, give feedback, and share articles you would like us to discuss.
If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, send us an email to listeners@articlesofados.com. Be sure to tune in next Thursday for a new episode of Undiscussed News you may have missed. So until next time, peace, fam.